In a small town tucked away in the heart of the Midwest, life moved at a slow pace. The streets were lined with old brick buildings, family-owned shops, and quiet neighborhoods where everyone seemed to know each other, or so it appeared on the surface. But beneath this seemingly peaceful exterior lay deep-rooted tensions that had simmered for years. At the center of these divisions was the local police department, an institution that many residents viewed not as protectors, but as oppressors. For decades, complaints about racial profiling and excessive force had poured into City Hall and state offices. Black families spoke of being pulled over without reason, of their children being harassed by officers while walking home from school, and of feeling like second-class citizens in their own community. These grievances weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern that stretched back generations. Yet, despite the mounting evidence, nothing changed. State authorities turned a blind eye, dismissing the concerns as exaggerations or isolated mistakes made by a few bad apples. The breaking point came when a video surfaced online, showing an officer violently arresting a teenage boy outside a convenience store. The footage spread like wildfire, sparking outrage across the country. Protesters took to the streets, demanding accountability and systemic change. Local leaders scrambled to contain the situation, issuing empty promises of reform. But the federal government decided enough was enough. It was time for an intervention. Enter the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, tasked with uncovering the truth behind the allegations of corruption within the police department. Leading the operation was Special Agent Marcus Reed, a seasoned investigator known for his calm demeanor and unwavering commitment to justice. With sharp eyes and a mind that missed no detail, Reed had earned respect throughout his career. He assembled a diverse team of agents, each bringing unique skills to the table. There was Agent Lisa Chen, a tech-savvy analyst who could dig up digital evidence faster than anyone else. Agent Jamal Washington, whose background in criminal psychology gave him insight into human behavior, and Agent Rachel Meyer, a former prosecutor adept at building cases. Their mission was clear: infiltrate the police department, gather evidence of misconduct, and determine whether the issues stemmed from individual actions or systemic failures. However, secrecy was paramount. If word got out about the investigation too soon, it could jeopardize their efforts and possibly put lives at risk. So, under the guise of conducting routine audits on departmental practices, the FBI team arrived in town, blending in as best they could. From the moment they stepped foot in the precinct, the atmosphere was tense. Officers eyed them suspiciously, whispering among themselves whenever the agents passed by. Some tried to be friendly, offering superficial pleasantries, but there was an underlying current of hostility that couldn't be ignored. One officer, in particular, stood out: Greg Hargrove. A burly man with a thick mustache and a booming voice, Hargrove had been with the department for over 2 decades. He prided himself on his tough-love approach to policing, though many saw it as thinly veiled aggression. His reputation preceded him. He was known for targeting minority communities during patrols and often boasted about making arrests based on gut feelings. Hargrove wasted no time expressing his disdain for the FBI's presence. During their first meeting, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and sneered. "What exactly are you folks looking for? We're just doing our jobs here." His tone dripped with sarcasm, and though Agent Reed maintained a professional demeanor, he could feel the tension in the room. Other officers exchanged nervous glances, unsure how far Hargrove would push things. For now, they kept their mouths shut, content to let him do the talking. As the days went by, the FBI team began digging deeper. They reviewed case files, analyzed arrest records, and interviewed both current and former officers. Patterns quickly emerged, patterns that painted a troubling picture. Arrest rates were disproportionately high for Black residents, even in cases where little to no evidence supported probable cause. Complaints against specific officers, including Hargrove, piled up year after year, yet discipline was virtually non-existent. When confronted with this data, Chief William Grady, the head of the department, shrugged it off. "These numbers don't tell the whole story," he insisted, avoiding direct answers. But it wasn't just the statistics that told a story. Residents came forward with personal accounts of mistreatment, some breaking down in tears as they recounted their experiences. An elderly woman described how officers had barged into her home late at night, guns drawn, claiming they were searching for drugs. Nothing was found, but the trauma lingered. A young father recalled being stopped multiple times on his way to work, always for minor infractions that somehow never applied to white drivers. Each story added another layer to the growing web of injustice. Despite the mounting evidence, resistance from within the police department remained fierce. Officers stonewalled investigators, refusing to cooperate or providing vague, contradictory statements. Files mysteriously went missing, and key witnesses suddenly became unavailable. It was clear that someone or several someones was working hard to obstruct the investigation. Hargrove, unsurprisingly, led the charge. He openly mocked the agents, calling them desk jockeys who didn't understand real police work. His comments struck a nerve, fueling resentment among his colleagues and emboldening others to follow suit. Still, Agent Reed refused to back down. He knew the stakes were high, not just for the people of this town but for countless others facing similar struggles nationwide. Every setback only strengthened his resolve. Late nights spent poring over documents, early mornings coordinating. With his team and endless conversations with wary residents became the norm. Slowly but surely, the pieces of the puzzle started coming together. And though the road ahead promised to be fraught with challenges, one thing was certain: the truth would come to light, no matter how deeply it was buried. This was more than just an investigation. It was a battle for justice, equality, and the soul of a fractured community. The FBI team quickly settled into their roles, blending in as much as possible while keeping a watchful eye on everything happening around them. Their days were filled with interviews, document reviews, and observations of the police department's daily operations. At first glance, it seemed like any other law enforcement agency: officers coming and going, dispatchers answering calls, and the hum of activity that came with running a precinct. But beneath the surface, cracks began to show almost immediately. Agent Marcus Reed took charge of interviewing officers, starting with those who had been with the department for years. He approached each conversation calmly, asking open-ended questions designed to encourage honest responses. Some officers were cooperative, though visibly nervous, while others gave curt answers and avoided eye contact. One such officer was Greg Hargrove, whose disdain for the FBI was palpable from the moment he walked into the room. Hargrove sat across from Agent Reed, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His chair creaked as he shifted uncomfortably, clearly irritated by the intrusion. "What do you want to know?" he asked gruffly, his tone dripping with impatience. "I'm just trying to get a sense of how things work here," Reed replied evenly, maintaining his composure despite the hostility radiating from the other man. "How would you describe your approach to policing?" Hargrove smirked, leaning forward slightly. "My approach? I go where the trouble is. If someone's breaking the law, they're going to hear about it from me. Simple as that." Reed nodded, jotting down notes. "And how do you determine who's causing trouble?" "Experience," Hargrove said, tapping his temple. "You learn to read people after a while. Trust me, I've been doing this long enough to know when something's off." Though vague, Hargrove's response wasn't unusual. Many seasoned officers relied on intuition, but Reed couldn't ignore the implications of what he was hearing. Intuition could easily mask bias, especially in a town where racial tensions ran high. He pressed further, asking about specific cases and procedures, but Hargrove grew increasingly evasive, deflecting questions with sarcastic remarks or outright refusal to elaborate. Meanwhile, Agent Lisa Chen focused her efforts on analyzing arrest records and patrol logs. She spent hours poring over spreadsheets, searching for patterns that might reveal systemic issues. What she found was alarming. Arrest rates for Black residents were significantly higher than those for white residents, even when accounting for population differences. In some neighborhoods, nearly half of all arrests involved minor infractions like jaywalking or expired vehicle registration, charges rarely pursued in predominantly white areas. When Chen presented her findings to the team, there was a collective sense of unease. These numbers didn't just point to isolated incidents, they suggested a widespread practice of targeting minority communities. But proving intent was another matter entirely. They needed more than statistics, they needed stories. That's where Agent Jamal Washington stepped in. With his background in criminal psychology, Washington had a knack for connecting with people and earning their trust. He began reaching out to community members, inviting them to share their experiences in confidence. At first, many were hesitant. Years of mistrust between the police and residents had created a wall of silence, and breaking through it wouldn't be easy. Washington started small, visiting local coffee shops, barbershops, and churches, places where people gathered naturally. He introduced himself not as an authority figure, but as someone genuinely interested in listening. Slowly, doors began to open. A young mother recounted how her teenage son had been stopped multiple times walking home from school, always for no apparent reason. An elderly man described being handcuffed during a traffic stop because the officer claimed his license plate frame obscured part-time visibility, a claim he knew was false. Each story added another layer to the growing web of injustice. One particularly harrowing account came from a woman named Sarah Thompson. She tearfully described the night officers burst into her home without warning, guns drawn, claiming they were searching for drugs. Her children, ages 6 and 8, hid under the kitchen table terrified while officers tore through every room. When nothing illegal was found, the officers left without explanation or apology. The emotional scars lingered long after the incident ended. As these testimonies accumulated, the team faced mounting resistance from within the police department. Officers who had initially appeared cooperative suddenly clammed up, refusing to answer follow-up questions or provide access to requested documents. Files went missing, computers malfunctioned, and key witnesses mysteriously became unavailable. It was clear that someone or several someones was actively working to obstruct the investigation. At the center of this resistance stood Greg Hargrove, whose animosity toward the FBI only intensified with each passing day. He openly mocked the agents, calling them outsiders who didn't understand the realities of policing in a tough neighborhood. During roll call, he made snide comments about federal interference, rallying his colleagues to view the investigation as an attack on their integrity. His words struck a chord with some officers, emboldening them to push back against the agent's presence. Despite the growing tension, the FBI team remained undeterred. They adapted their strategies, relying on covert methods to gather evidence. Surveillance cameras installed discreetly around the precinct captured interactions between officers, revealing subtle yet telling behaviors. Conversations recorded during stakeouts hinted at collusion among certain individuals, while anonymous tips pointed to deeper corruption within the ranks. Behind closed doors, Chief William Grady struggled to maintain control. On one hand, he wanted to cooperate with the FBI to avoid further scrutiny. On the other hand, he feared alienating his own officers, many of whom viewed the investigation as a personal affront. Caught in the middle, Grady oscillated between defensiveness and resignation, offering vague assurances while avoiding direct confrontation. For Agent Reed and his team, the challenge was immense. Every step forward felt like 2 steps back, as obstacles constantly arose to derail their progress. Yet amidst the frustration, there were moments of hope. Residents who had once been afraid to speak out began organizing community meetings, demanding transparency and accountability. Local leaders joined forces with advocacy groups, amplifying the call for reform. Even some officers quietly expressed support for the investigation, acknowledging that change was long overdue. As the weeks turned into months, the stakes continued to rise. The FBI's presence had ignited a powder keg of resentment, forcing long-buried issues to the surface. For better or worse, the town was on the brink of transformation, and the outcome would depend on whether truth could triumph over fear. The investigation was far from smooth sailing. As the FBI team dug deeper, the cracks in the police department's foundation grew wider and more glaring. Evidence of misconduct piled up, arrest records showing blatant racial disparities, patrol, logs revealing targeted stops in minority neighborhoods, and whistleblower testimonies detailing everything from falsified reports to outright abuse. Agent Marcus Reed knew they were onto something big, but the closer they got to the truth, the fiercer the resistance became. Chief William Grady tried to play mediator between the FBI and his officers, but it was clear he was walking a tightrope. On one side, there was pressure from above, city officials and even the mayor herself demanding that the feds be given full cooperation. On the other side, his own officers were growing restless, led by none other than Greg Hargrove, who had become the unofficial ringleader of defiance within the department. Hargrove made no secret of his disdain for the investigation, often muttering under his breath about federal busybodies overstepping their bounds. His attitude spread like wildfire among certain factions of the force, creating an atmosphere thick with tension. Agent Reed requested access to sensitive internal records, disciplinary files, use of force reports, and internal affairs investigations, but these requests were met with stonewalling at every turn. Chief Grady claimed the documents were temporarily unavailable, citing technical issues or misplaced paperwork. It was a flimsy excuse, and everyone knew it. Meanwhile, Mayor Patricia Lansing publicly supported the FBI's efforts while privately urging Grady to minimize damage to the town's reputation. Her conflicting messages only added to the chaos, leaving both sides frustrated and distrustful. Hargrove, however, wasn't content to sit back and let bureaucracy slow things down. He took matters into his own hands, rallying a group of like-minded officers to actively sabotage the investigation. They began spreading rumors throughout the precinct, painting the FBI agents as biased outsiders determined to destroy the department's credibility. According to Hargrove, the federal probe wasn't about rooting out corruption. It was a witch hunt aimed at discrediting honest cops just doing their jobs. Though this narrative was baseless, it resonated with some officers who felt cornered and defensive. Outside the precinct, the situation was equally volatile. Word of the FBI's presence had leaked to the public, sparking heated debates across the town. Opinions were sharply divided. Some residents praised the investigation as a long overdue step toward accountability, while others sided with the police, believing the agents were overreaching and undermining local authority. Social media became a battleground, with hashtags trending on both sides of the issue. Protesters gathered outside City Hall holding signs that read, "Justice now," and "Support our cops." The divide ran deep, cutting through families, workplaces, and friendships. Amidst all this turmoil, the FBI team pressed on. Agent Lisa Chen worked tirelessly to piece together the digital trail left behind by the police department. Using advanced software, she uncovered deleted emails and encrypted messages exchanged between officers. One particularly damning thread revealed discussions about how to handle problematic cases, specifically, which ones to bury and which ones to exaggerate. Another batch of communications hinted at collusion between certain officers and local politicians, suggesting a web of corruption that extended beyond the precinct. Agent Jamal Washington continued reaching out to community members, building trust and gathering first-hand accounts of misconduct. His approach was patient and empathetic. He didn't push for information but instead created a safe space for people to share their stories. Over time, more voices emerged, some hesitant, others emboldened by the growing momentum of the movement. A young man named Derek recounted being pulled over repeatedly for minor infractions, each stop escalating until he was forced to spend a night in jail despite having done nothing wrong. An elderly woman described being handcuffed during a routine traffic stop simply because the officer claimed her license plate frame violated visibility laws, a claim she knew was fabricated. These testimonies painted a chilling picture of life under a discriminatory system. But collecting evidence wasn't enough. The team needed to protect their sources. Anonymous tip lines were set up, allowing residents to report incidents without fear of retaliation. Still, paranoia lingered. Many worried that speaking out would make them targets, not just of the police but also of neighbors who might view them as traitors. Tensions reached a boiling point when Agent Rachel Meyer attempted to interview a key witness, A former officer named Carl Jenkins, who had recently resigned after witnessing what he described as unforgivable behavior. Jenkins agreed to meet with Meyer at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. However, before the meeting could take place, Jenkins received a threatening phone call warning him to stay silent. When Meyer arrived, Jenkins was visibly shaken, refusing to divulge any details until he felt safer. Despite her best efforts to reassure him, Jenkins ultimately decided against cooperating further, citing concerns for his family's safety. Frustrated but undeterred, the FBI team adapted yet again. Surveillance cameras installed discreetly around the precinct captured interactions between officers, providing valuable insights into their dynamics. Conversations recorded during stakeouts revealed coded language used to coordinate cover-ups. Even anonymous tips pointed to deeper layers of corruption, implicating not just rank-and-file officers but higher-ups as well. Greg Hargrove remained a central figure in the resistance. His hostility toward the FBI escalated, culminating in a confrontation that shocked everyone involved. During a routine audit session, Hargrove stormed into the conference room where Agent Reed and his team were reviewing documents. His face was red with anger, veins bulging in his neck as he slammed a folder onto the table. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" he spat, glaring at Reed. "Coming in here poking your noses where they don't belong, you have no idea what it's like out there." Reed remained calm, his voice steady. "Officer Hargrove, our job is to ensure justice is served. If there's nothing to hide, then there's nothing to worry about." Hargrove scoffed, shaking his head. "Justice? That's rich coming from you. All you care about is tearing us down. Well, let me tell you something. We're not going to roll over and take it." The room fell silent as Hargrove turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The exchange left the team uneasy but resolute. They knew they were dealing with someone who wouldn't back down easily, and who might go to extreme lengths to protect himself and his allies. Despite the mounting challenges, the FBI team refused to give up. Every setback only fueled their determination to uncover the truth. For Agent Reed, this wasn't just about solving a case. It was about giving a voice to those who had been silenced for too long. The road ahead was fraught with obstacles, but they were prepared to face whatever came their way. The tension between the FBI team and the local police department had been simmering for weeks, but it finally boiled over one humid summer evening. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of the town. What started as a routine traffic stop quickly spiraled into chaos, becoming a flashpoint that would define the investigation and expose just how deep the animosity ran. It began innocently enough. Greg Hargrove was on patrol near the outskirts of town, an area known for its predominantly black population. As he drove down a narrow residential street, his headlights caught sight of a young man walking along the sidewalk. The man, Jamal Carter, was wearing a hoodie and carrying a backpack. Nothing unusual, but to Hargrove it was enough to raise suspicion. Hargrove pulled over and stepped out of his cruiser, his heavy boots thudding against the pavement. "Hey, you there," he called out, his voice sharp and commanding. Jamal turned, visibly startled. He was only 19 with a lean frame and cautious eyes. "What's up, officer?" Jamal asked, his tone polite but wary. "I need to see some ID." Hargrove said, striding toward him. His hand rested casually on the grip of his holstered gun, a subtle yet unmistakable show of authority. Jamal hesitated for a moment before reaching into his pocket to retrieve his wallet. "I'm just heading home from work," he explained. Holding up his ID card, Hargrove snatched it from his hand, barely glancing at it before snapping, "What's in the bag?" "Just my laptop and some books," Jamal replied, growing more uneasy. "I'm studying online." Without another word, Hargrove grabbed the backpack and began rifling through it. Inside, he found exactly what Jamal had described: a laptop, a charger, and a few textbooks. Still unsatisfied, Hargrove demanded, "Why are you walking instead of driving? Don't you have a car?" "No, sir," Jamal said, shaking his head. "My mom uses ours during the day. I take the bus or walk when I can." Hargrove sneered, clearly unconvinced. You expect me to believe that? This neighborhood doesn't exactly scream college student. His tone dripped with sarcasm, laced with thinly veiled prejudice. By now, Jamal's frustration was mounting. Look, I showed you my ID. There's nothing illegal in my bag. Can I go now? But Hargrove wasn't done. He leaned closer, invading Jamal's personal space. Don't get smart with me, kid. If I say you're staying put, you stay put. As the confrontation escalated, two FBI agents happened to be driving nearby. Agent Jamal Washington and Agent Rachel Meyer were returning from a community meeting. When they noticed the scene unfolding under the dim glow of a street lamp, something about the interaction felt off, so they slowed their vehicle and parked a short distance away. Washington stepped out first, approaching cautiously. Is everything okay here? He asked, his voice calm but firm. Hargrove spun around, his face reddening with anger. This is none of your business, Fed. Back off. It is our business if protocol isn't being followed, Washington replied evenly. We're conducting an investigation, remember? Meyer joined her colleague, standing slightly behind him but keeping a close eye on Hargrove's body language. She noted the way his hand hovered near his weapon, the tension radiating from his posture. It was clear the situation could escalate quickly. Meanwhile, Jamal looked relieved to see the agents. They stopped me for no reason, he said, gesturing toward Hargrove. I haven't done anything wrong. Hargrove scoffed. Oh, here we go. Calling in the cavalry already? Typical. This isn't about taking sides, Washington said, maintaining his composure. It's about ensuring everyone follows the law, including officers. Hargrove bristled at the implication. Are you accusing me of something? Because let me tell you, I've been doing this job longer than you've been breathing. Before things could devolve further, Meyer interjected. Let's all take a step back. Officer Hargrove, do you have probable cause for this stop? Hargrove hesitated, realizing he was cornered. Without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, his actions were questionable at best. But admitting fault wasn't in his nature. Instead, he doubled down. Probable cause? How about common sense? Kids walking around late at night in a high-crime area, that's reason enough. That's not how the law works, Washington countered. If you don't have justification, then you need to let him go. For a moment, it seemed like Hargrove might comply. But pride got the better of him. With a scowl, he snapped, Fine. Walk away, kid. But don't think this is over. Jamal didn't wait to be told twice. He hurried off down the street, glancing back only once to make sure the agents were still watching. As soon as he was out of earshot, Hargrove rounded on the FBI duo. You people make me sick, he spat. Coming in here undermining our authority, siding with criminals. Mark my words, you'll regret sticking your noses where they don't belong. Washington raised an eyebrow. Undermining authority? Or holding officers accountable? There's a difference. Yeah, well, we'll see who comes out on top. Hargrove shot back, storming back to his cruiser. He slammed the door shut and sped off, tires squealing against the asphalt. The encounter left both agents shaken but resolute. They knew incidents like this weren't isolated. They were symptoms of a much larger problem. And while confronting Hargrove had de-escalated the immediate threat to Jamal, it also signaled a dangerous shift in dynamics. The hostility between the FBI and certain members of the police force was no longer simmering beneath the surface. It had erupted into open conflict. Word of the altercation spread quickly. By morning, rumors were flying throughout the precinct. Some officers sided with Hargrove, viewing the agent's intervention as federal overreach. Others remained silent, unwilling to risk backlash by speaking out. Meanwhile, Chief Grady called an emergency meeting, attempting to regain control of the narrative. This has gone far enough, Grady said, pacing in front of his assembled staff. We're supposed to be cooperating with the FBI, not picking fights with them. Do you understand what's at stake here? Hargrove, seated near the front, crossed his arms defiantly. Cooperating? They're trying to tear us apart, Chief. First they come sniffing around, digging up dirt. Now they're interfering with stops. Where does it end? It ends when we prove we have nothing to hide, Grady replied sharply. Until then, I expect professionalism from every single one of you. Is that clear? The room fell silent, but the tension was palpable. Hargrove exchanged knowing glances with a few colleagues, silently vowing to fight back in his own way. Outside the precinct, news of the incident made headlines. Local media outlets picked up the story, framing it as a clash between federal oversight and local autonomy. Protesters gathered outside City Hall holding signs that read, "Enough is enough and protect our community." Social media buzzed with debates, hashtags trending as residents weighed in on both sides of the issue. For the FBI team, the stakes had never been higher. Their presence had ignited a powder keg of resentment, forcing long-buried tensions to the surface. Yet, despite the challenges, they pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. Each obstacle only strengthened their resolve, reminding them why they had taken on this mission in the first place. As Agent Reed reviewed the details of the traffic stop later that evening, he couldn't help but feel a mix of frustration and determination. "We're making progress," he told his team, "but we're also stepping into a hornet's nest. Be ready for whatever comes next." And come it did. The confrontation with Hargrove marked the beginning of a new phase in the investigation, one defined not just by evidence gathering but by outright resistance. The battle lines had been drawn, and neither side was willing to back down. The fallout from the traffic stop incident rippled through the town like a shockwave, leaving no one untouched. For Greg Hargrove and his allies within the police department, the confrontation with the FBI wasn't just an embarrassment, it was a declaration of war. They saw themselves as guardians of law and order, unfairly targeted by outsiders who didn't understand the realities of their job. To them, the federal agents weren't investigators, they were invaders, threatening to dismantle everything they believed in. Hargrove became obsessed with discrediting the FBI at any cost. He spent hours rallying his colleagues, painting the agents as enemies of the community rather than protectors of justice. During roll calls, he openly mocked their methods, calling them desk jockeys who had never faced real danger. His rhetoric struck a chord with some officers, especially those who felt cornered by the investigation. Slowly but surely, Hargrove built a coalition of resistance within the department united by fear, pride, and resentment. But resentment alone wasn't enough to derail the FBI's mission. Hargrove knew they needed a plan, a bold, dramatic move that would expose what he called federal incompetence once and for all. Late one night, after another heated meeting with Chief Grady, Hargrove gathered a small group of trusted officers in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and tension as he laid out his scheme. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Hargrove said, slamming his fist on the table for emphasis. "They want to accuse us of corruption? Fine. Let's give them something to talk about." His plan was reckless and dangerous. Stage a fake drug bust involving planted evidence and fabricated arrests. The idea was to create a high-profile case that would fall apart under scrutiny, making the FBI look incompetent and overzealous. If executed properly, it could shift public opinion back in their favor and force the feds to retreat with their tails between their legs. At first, some of the officers hesitated. Planting evidence was risky, even for seasoned cops accustomed to bending rules. But Hargrove was persuasive, playing on their fears and egos. "We're not doing anything illegal," he insisted. "Just leveling the playing field. If they can come in here and ruin our reputations, we can show the world what happens when you mess with people who know how to play dirty." Reluctantly, the group agreed to proceed. Over the next few days, they meticulously planned every detail of the operation. They chose a target, a quiet, unassuming man named Marcus Lewis, a local mechanic with no criminal record. Lewis lived alone in a modest apartment on the edge of town, making him an easy mark. Hargrove reasoned that if anyone asked questions later, they could claim he fit the profile of a low-level dealer trying to stay under the radar. On the night of the raid, Hargrove and his team moved quickly. Under cover of darkness, they broke into Lewis's apartment, planting bags of cocaine in his kitchen cabinets and drawers. They made sure to leave behind enough evidence to secure an arrest, but not so much that it would raise immediate suspicion. By sunrise, the setup was complete. The next morning, Hargrove led a team of officers to Lewis's apartment, kicking down the door with guns drawn. Startled and confused, Lewis was dragged out in handcuffs while neighbors watched in disbelief. The scene was dramatic and chaotic, exactly what Hargrove had hoped for. Within hours, news of the arrest spread across social media and local news outlets, with headlines proclaiming a major drug bust thanks to the vigilance of the police department. For a brief moment, it seemed like Hargrove's plan might work. Critics of the FBI seized on the story, accusing the agents of focusing on trivial matters instead of supporting real crime-fighting efforts. But Hargrove underestimated one crucial factor: surveillance cameras. Unbeknownst to him, the FBI had installed discrete recording devices throughout the area as part of their broader investigation. These cameras captured not only the raid itself, but also footage of Hargrove and his team breaking into Lewis's apartment the night before. When Agent Marcus Reed reviewed the footage, his blood ran cold. The images told a damning story: officers tampering with evidence, planting drugs, and orchestrating a false arrest. It was the smoking gun they had been searching for, proof of systemic corruption that extended far beyond isolated incidents. Armed with this evidence, Reed and his team confronted Hargrove directly. They arrived at the precinct early the next morning, catching him off guard as he sipped coffee in the break room. When Reed played the video on his laptop, Hargrove's face turned pale. For a moment, he was speechless, staring at the screen in stunned silence. "You've got nothing," he finally stammered, though his voice lacked conviction. "This is some kind of trick. You're framing us." Reed remained calm, his expression unreadable. "It's over, Officer Hargrove. You're under arrest." Panicked and desperate, Hargrove lashed out. In a bizarre act of defiance, he grabbed Reed's wrist and snapped a pair of handcuffs around both of their arms, effectively binding them together. "If I'm going down, you're coming with me," he shouted, his voice echoing through the precinct. The surreal spectacle drew a crowd of officers and staff, many of whom stood frozen in shock. Some laughed nervously, unsure whether to take the situation seriously. Others exchanged worried glances, realizing the gravity of what had just unfolded. Hargrove continued ranting, accusing the FBI of entrapment and demanding answers, but his theatrics only made things worse, turning what should have been a straightforward arrest into a circus-like scene. Media outlets pounced on the story, dubbing it the Handcuffed debacle. Videos of the incident went viral, sparking memes and jokes at Hargrove's expense. What was meant to be a calculated strike against the FBI had backfired spectacularly, further eroding public trust in the police department. Even those who had initially supported the officers began to question their integrity. For the FBI team, the moment was bittersweet. While they now had undeniable proof of misconduct, the absurdity of the situation highlighted just how entrenched the culture of corruption had become. As Reed finally freed himself from the handcuffs with Hargrove in tow, he couldn't help but feel a mix of triumph and sadness. Triumph because they had uncovered the truth. Sadness because it had come at such a steep cost to the community, to the profession, and to the ideals of justice itself. As Hargrove was led away in disgrace, the weight of his actions began to sink in. The town was divided, raw emotions bubbling to the surface as residents grappled with the implications of what had happened. For many, it was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of the systemic issues that had plagued their community for decades. For others, it was a betrayal, a violation of the trust they had placed in those sworn to protect them. But amidst the chaos, there was also hope. The exposure of Hargrove's scheme marked a turning point, forcing the town to confront uncomfortable truths and paving the way for meaningful change. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time the light of accountability had begun to shine through the darkness.